The first time American and British tank crews saw a Tiger I, they didn't think it was real. It was too big, too wide, too tall, too thickly armored to belong to the same world as the Shermans they drove every day. Crews stared at photographs and intelligence sketches in disbelief. Some thought they were propaganda exaggerations. But in Tunisia in early 1943, the illusion vanished. The Tiger appeared in the dust like a moving fortress, its armor shrugging off incoming fire with the indifference of a battleship brushing aside waves. And when Sherman's 75mm rounds bounced off its hull like pebbles thrown at a brick wall, crews realized something that chilled them to the bone. The Sherman could not kill this thing. Not from the front, not from the sides, sometimes not even from behind. The Tiger's reign began that day, not as a tank, but as a psychological weapon. It became a whisper in campfires, a rumor spread between foxholes, a silhouette that haunted gunners in their sleep. If you see a Tiger, one British tanker joked bitterly, you're supposed to radio headquarters and ask them what your next of kin want engraved on the tombstone. But behind the humor lay fear, the cold, helpless fear of facing an enemy you physically could not defeat. Everything about the Tiger made the Sherman seem like a toy. Its 88mm KWK-36 cannon fired shells that ripped through a Sherman at 1,500 meters, sometimes farther. Its armor, sloped and thick, absorbed hits that should have destroyed lesser tanks. Its turret was slow but deliberate, its optics immaculate. To American gunners, the Tiger was not just dangerous, it was unfair. Its presence turned ordinary tank duels into executions. One American commander described it as a tank for which we had no answer, except to pray it didn't see us first. In North Africa, the Shermans tried everything. They flanked, they fired smoke, they rushed the Tiger in groups of 5, hoping one of them might get a close-range shot at a weak spot. But more often than not, the Tiger calmly turned its turret, fired once, and left burning hulls scattered in its wake. At Kasserine Pass, a Tiger knocked out 6 Shermans before the Americans even determined where the shots were coming from. After one engagement, a British officer wrote in his diary, "We threw steel at it until the barrels glowed, and it did not care." By the time the Normandy invasion approached in mid-1944, the Tiger wasn't just a tank, it was a myth, a specter, a creature that commanders whispered about in briefing rooms and soldiers cursed under their breath. Allied crews developed a dark term for their own machines, Tommy cookers. The nickname stung because it was true. A Sherman hit by an 88 didn't just die, it burst into flames, cooking the crew alive. The Tiger, meanwhile, loomed invincible on the French hedgerows, its gun firing with surgical precision through breaks in the bocage. The situation grew desperate. Infantry couldn't advance unless they knew no Tiger lurked ahead. Tankers dreaded every rustle of trees. Even the mighty Sherman, produced in the tens of thousands, felt suddenly obsolete. Commanders started calling for artillery and air support every time they suspected a Tiger was anywhere within 2 miles. One American platoon leader summed up the problem perfectly. Our tanks are fine until we meet a Tiger. Then they're coffins. What made it worse was how few Tigers actually existed. German production was slow, meticulous, over-engineered, but each Tiger created a sphere of fear far larger than its physical presence. A single Tiger could stall an entire regiment. A lone Tiger placed at the edge of a village could delay a full armored push for hours. The Allies didn't need to kill every Tiger, they just needed a weapon that could kill one, yet none existed. Not the Sherman 75mm, not the British 6-pounder, not the American M10 tank destroyer, except at suicidal ranges. The Tiger had rewritten the rules of armored warfare, and every Allied tanker felt that weight. They talked about it in hushed voices. When will we get something that can kill it? When will we stop being the hunted? But the answer didn't come from American factories or high command. It came from British engineers working in cramped sheds and workshops, men who looked at a Sherman and saw not a flaw, but a blank canvas. They had a radical idea, a dangerous idea, a borderline absurd idea. What if we take the most powerful anti-tank gun in the entire Allied arsenal and force it into the turret of a Sherman? Impossible, some said. Reckless, others argued, but the British ignored them. They saw the problem clearly. The Tiger reigned because no Allied gun could challenge it. So they designed one that could. They built it, they tested it, then they bolted it into the side of a Sherman turret that never meant to hold it. And in doing so, they changed the war. When the first Firefly rolled out of the workshop, long gun barrel protruding like the sting of a scorpion, tank crew stared in shock. Could this finally be the weapon that made the Tiger bleed? They didn't know it yet, but the answer was yes. Very soon, in the hedgerows of Normandy, the Firefly would prove it, and the Tiger's era of invincibility would end with a single shot.
No one expected salvation to come from a workshop barely big enough to hold a single tank. No one believed the solution to the Tiger problem would emerge from British engineers armed not with vast factories or massive budgets, but with stubbornness, desperation, and a willingness to do what others called impossible. Yet that is exactly where the Sherman Firefly was born. Out of cramped sheds, improvised sketches, and the audacity to turn a tank the Germans mocked into a weapon they would soon fear. The idea began with a single question posed by British ordnance designers in early 1943. What if we put the 17-pounder inside a Sherman? To anyone who understood armor, physics, or common sense, the answer should have been, you can't. The 17-pounder was huge, far bigger than anything the Sherman's turret was meant to handle. It had a massive breech block, the recoil mechanism was enormous, and the gun's long barrel unbalanced everything. A Sherman turret simply didn't have the space or the structural integrity to house such a weapon. But British engineers were done playing fair. They had seen Tigers chewing through Allied armor in Tunisia. They had seen Shermans burn. They knew the soldiers needed more than bravery. They needed firepower. So, the impossible became an engineering challenge. The painful, brilliant, almost reckless engineering. Fitting the 17-pounder into the Sherman turret was like trying to squeeze a cathedral organ into a telephone booth. Something had to give. Many things, actually. The first step was radical. Rotate the breech block sideways. By turning the massive breech 90 degrees, they were able to cram it inside, but only barely. The gunner would now have to operate it in an awkward sideways motion, but it worked. That was enough. Next problem? The recoil of the 17-pounder would rip the turret off its ring if fired without modification. Solution? A brand new recoil system, shortened and reinforced, that allowed the gun to fire without blowing the tank apart. Then came the radio. The Sherman stored its radio inside the turret bustle, but the new gun consumed every inch of space. So, the engineers cut open the back of the turret, built a new armored box welded externally, and stuffed the radio inside. This odd bulge became one of the Firefly's signature features. Finally, the barrel. The 17-pounder's barrel was absurdly long, longer than anything on a Sherman, longer even than many German guns. It unbalanced the turret so severely they had to add counterweights in the rear. It also made the Firefly instantly recognizable on the battlefield, which was deadly. German tank crews quickly learned, shoot the long-barreled Sherman first. To solve this, crews camouflaged the barrel with disruptive stripes, canvas wraps, or paint schemes that made the Firefly resemble a standard 75mm Sherman at a glance. Some even painted false muzzle brakes or shadows to trick German spotters. The result was ugly to some eyes, strange to others, but to those who understood what it meant, the Firefly was beautiful. A Sherman that could kill a Tiger. A tank that finally gave Allied crews a fighting chance. A miracle born from improvisation. The gun that changed everything. The 17-pounder was the true heart of the Firefly. It fired AP, HE, and, most importantly, APDS, armor-piercing, discarding sabot, a dart-like tungsten round so fast it punched through heavy armor like a spear of lightning. At 1,000 meters, the regular Sherman gun struggled even against a Panzer IV. At the same distance, the 17-pounder could penetrate Tiger armor, frontal armor, punch through Panther glasses plates, and destroy almost any German vehicle from assault guns to half-tracks in a single brutal strike. Its muzzle velocity was astonishing, over 1,200 meters per second with APDS, nearly twice that of many German guns. When American crews first fired it, many flinched instinctively. The blast felt like a physical blow. One British gunner described it as a thunderbolt you held in your hands. Testing the monster, shock and awe. When prototype Fireflies were first tested on British proving grounds, observers expected clattering, misaligned recoil, maybe even structural failure. Instead, the gun fired with violent but controlled precision. The Sherman rocked backward, dust billowed, and the distant target, a plate meant to mimic Tiger armor, split open like cracked stone. The engineers stared at each other in disbelief. It worked. It actually worked. Word spread quickly. American crews who happened to witness tests were stunned. They had grown used to 75mm shells bouncing off thick armor. Seeing a 17-pounder punch a hole clean through was almost emotional, a moment of vindication. One American tanker, after seeing the Firefly fire, whispered, "We're not prey anymore." The pushback, doubts, politics, and pride. Despite its astonishing performance, not everyone welcomed the Firefly. Some American commanders resisted the idea of adopting a British modified Sherman. There were debates, arguments, and bureaucratic hesitation. The U.S. favored its new tank destroyer doctrine and believed Shermans weren't meant to fight heavy tanks. But in the field, where lives depended on steel and fire rather than theory, the crews had no doubts. They wanted protection. They wanted power. They wanted the Firefly. British commanders insisted that each armored troop, or platoon, include at least one Firefly. American officers, after seeing Normandy's bocage and its deadly ambush terrain, quickly followed suit. The Firefly wasn't just accepted, it was demanded. The secret deployment. By the time the Allies prepared to invade Normandy, Fireflies rolled off converted factory lines at speed. Crews were trained quietly, tanks were shipped quietly. There was no press release, no public unveiling. The Firefly was a weapon of necessity, not ceremony. By D-Day, the British had over 600 Fireflies ready. The Americans received theirs slightly later. German intelligence had no idea what was coming. Soon, Tiger crews would learn very suddenly that the long-barreled Sherman they once ignored was the only one capable of ending them at over a kilometer away. Normandy would be the Firefly's proving ground. Normandy would be the Tiger's reckoning. Normandy would show the world that the joke was over. Because in the hedgerows and villages of France, a single shot from a Firefly would shatter the myth of the Tiger forever. And that moment, the first Tiger kill was about to change the entire war.
Dawn in Normandy was never gentle. It came with the growl of engines, the groaning of metal tracks twisting through hedgerows, and the low, anxious breathing of tank crews who knew that any break in the greenery could hide a German gun. The bocage was a nightmare, tight, claustrophobic, thick with ambush points. For Sherman crews, it felt like fighting blindfolded inside a maze built by the enemy. And somewhere in that maze, prowling like a ghost made of steel, was the machine they feared above all others, the Tiger I. Every Allied tanker knew the rule. If you saw a Tiger first, you ran. If the Tiger saw you first, you died.
That equation had never changed, not in Tunisia, not in Italy, not in the early days of Normandy. But in June 1944, somewhere near Villers-Bocage, the equation shifted for the first time, and it shifted because of one tank, the Sherman Firefly. Its long 17-pounder barrel caught the early light as it crawled into position at the edge of a hedgerow. The crew inside, British but accompanied by attached American observers curious about the new Tiger killer, moved with a precision born from fear and training. They knew Tigers had been sighted nearby. They knew the German ace, Michael Wittmann's unit, had torn through British armor just hours before. And they knew that if a Tiger rounded the corner of that country road, there would be no time for second chances. The Firefly eased its hull into the shadow of an orchard wall. The gunner, cramped in his sideways rotated breech, steadied the 17-pounder. The commander scanned through binoculars so intensely he barely blinked. The loader whispered to himself, a quiet chant timed with his breathing. The morning wind shook the leaves. A bird lifted from a branch. Then they heard it. The deep, slow, terrifying rumble of a Maybach HL-230 engine moving through the hedgerows like a predator sniffing the air. A Tiger. It appeared not with drama, but with inevitability. Long barrel emerging first, then the turret face, then the massive hull. To the Sherman crew, it felt like watching a nightmare step out of the trees. The Tiger rolled into view, unstoppable, confident, unaware it was walking into the one thing it had never faced before, an Allied tank that could kill it head-on. The Firefly commander murmured, "Hold, hold." The gunner's breathing stopped. The Tiger angled slightly, offering a shot at its flank, still thick armor, but penetrable. Fire. The 17-pounder roared like thunder split in half. The recoil smashed backward, rattling the entire tank. The AP round streaked across the narrow French lane, hit the Tiger's side armor just behind the turret, and for the first time in the war, something unbelievable happened. The Tiger jerked, not from motion, but from pain. A bloom of orange blew out of its side. The crew inside felt the shockwave of steel ripping apart. The loader was already ramming another round home. His hands were a blur. Up! Target still alive. Fire again. The second shot came a heartbeat later. Another blast. Another eruption of smoke and sparks. The Tiger lurched to a stop, turret frozen mid-turn, its engine stuttering. A third round punched straight through the turret ring, sending fragments of molten steel into the fighting compartment. The German crew never had a chance to fire back. The Tiger sagged as if kneeling, then went still. For the full 3 seconds, no one in the Firefly moved. They simply stared, shocked, disbelieving, at the smoking hulk of the machine that had terrified the Allies for 2 years. And then the commander whispered the words that would echo across the entire front. Tiger destroyed. The message traveled faster than any tank. It flew through radio networks, through infantry companies, through armored regiments. American crews who had doubted the Firefly's power now repeated the story like a prayer. They killed a Tiger. A Sherman killed a Tiger. In every hedgerow, in every foxhole, the myth cracked. The Tiger was no longer invincible. The Firefly had ended that illusion with 3 shots. After that day, Fireflies became the most feared tanks on the battlefield, not by the Americans or Brits, but by the Germans. Panzer commanders began scanning hedgerows for the telltale long barrel. Orders circulated, engage the Firefly first. But by then, it was too late. The Tigers that had once stalked the battlefield had become the hunted, and the machine that hunted them was the unlikely hero nobody expected. The awkward, improvised, overgunned, impossible Sherman Firefly. Normandy had proven something the Germans never wanted to believe. The Allies finally had a tank that could go toe-to-toe with the Tiger and win.
The moment the first Tiger fell to a Firefly in Normandy, something fundamentally shifted on the battlefield. Fear changed direction. For the first time since the Tigers had rolled into Tunisia, German tank commanders were no longer the only apex predators in armored combat. Now there was something out there with a gun long enough to reach them first, with piercing power strong enough to split their armor, and with a crew confident enough to wait in silence while a German giant passed unknowingly in front of their barrel. The Firefly was never meant to exist. It was improvised, cramped, awkward. But in Normandy 1944, it became the weapon the Germans dreaded most. Yet it wasn't just the gun that changed the war, it was the tactics. The Firefly was never deployed alone. It was a single blade hidden inside a larger fist. Each troop of 4 Shermans usually carried 1 Firefly, and this made it both invaluable and vulnerable. German gunners quickly learned that the long 17-pounder barrel was unmistakable. One glance, 1 second of recognition, and the Firefly became the first target. Even Panthers and Tigers, accustomed to dominating every engagement, received a chilling order through their radios: shoot the long-barreled Sherman first. The Allies knew it, so they adapted. Firefly commanders began hiding their biggest strength, the gun itself. Crews painted disruptive stripes along the barrel so that from a distance it looked short. They wrapped it in canvas, smeared it with mud, or painted false shadows to break its silhouette. Some even tied foliage or rags around the muzzle to disguise its profile. A Panther crew staring across a hedgerow at a line of Shermans might not realize that one of those regular tanks carried enough firepower to kill them before they could traverse their turret. That ignorance was fatal. The Firefly's role in battle soon became clear. It was the executioner of the troop. While the standard Shermans engaged, maneuvered, and drew German fire, the Firefly stayed back, lurking like a patient sniper. It would not move first. It would not shoot first unless the shot was perfect. The 17-pounder did not forgive mistakes. Its muzzle blast revealed its position instantly, and German optics were sharp enough to spot the source. So Firefly commanders learned to wait. They let the battle unfold. Let the German tanks reveal themselves. Let the Shermans bait the enemy into turning their turrets. And then, when the Panther exposed its flank, when the Tiger crested the hedgerow, when the Stug reversed into a shallow ditch, the Firefly struck. 1 shot, sometimes 2, rarely 3. Enough to end a tank whose armor once seemed invincible. In the dense hedgerows of Normandy, Fireflies often position themselves behind 2 layers of cover. Their long barrels poked through the smallest gaps, sometimes so narrow that the commander and gunner used only slivers of sightline to track German armor. They became shadows inside shadows, perfectly still until the moment of firing. German crews frequently reported tanks being hit from angles they didn't believe were accessible. Many assumed they were being attacked by towed anti-tank guns or artillery. They never suspected it was a Sherman because until Normandy, a Sherman had no right to kill a Tiger or Panther at such ranges. The Firefly's effectiveness wasn't limited to Normandy. When the British advanced toward Caen, Panther units learned to fear the distant crack of a 17-pounder. At Nijmegen, Fireflies knocked out Tiger IIs attempting to cross the bridges. In the Ardennes, when German armor launched its desperate counteroffensive, Fireflies helped blunt the spearhead by engaging Panthers at standoff distances where American 75mm shells were useless. The Firefly gave Allied armored doctrine something it had never possessed: parity. There were moments, fleeting but real, where Allied armored units weren't just surviving the battlefield, they were dominating it. Still, the Firefly's greatest tactical evolution was psychological. Sherman crews who once felt doomed when facing heavier German armor suddenly had hope. They had a weapon in their formation that could fight back, and that confidence changed how they moved, how they fought, and how they coordinated. A Sherman troop with a Firefly wasn't prey anymore. They could counterattack, they could hold ground, they could protect infantry from armored thrusts. Infantrymen quickly learned to look for the Firefly. Its presence meant that if a Tiger appeared on the ridge, someone had a gun that could challenge it. But the Germans learned even faster. Veterans of Panzer units later admitted that Fireflies forced them to alter their entire approach to armored combat. They avoided exposing their front in open ground, they deployed smoke more often, they hesitated at long distances where once they felt untouchable. The Tiger, the Panther, even the powerful Jagdpanzer all became cautious predators because now, in the hedgerows and fields of northwest Europe, a long-barreled Sherman might be watching them with a loaded 17-pounder aimed straight at their heart. The hunted had become the hunters, and the tiger-killing reputation that began with one Firefly ambush in Villers-Bocage soon spread across the entire Western Front. Panzer commanders learned a new instinct. If you see a Sherman with a long barrel, you don't wait, you don't observe, you shoot immediately. Because if you don't, the Firefly will. By the end of 1944, the battlefield itself seemed to acknowledge a truth that neither engineers nor commanders had fully understood when the first Firefly rolled out of that cramped British workshop. This unlikely hybrid, half American steel, half British stubbornness, had changed the war. It had altered the psychology of armored combat, reshaped how Allied tankers saw themselves, and forced even the most confident German crews to admit that their days of unquestioned dominance were over. The Firefly did not win the war alone, but it changed the feeling of the war, replacing dread with possibility, despair with determination, and the helplessness of early tank engagements with a new, grounded belief: we can kill them now. American crews, who once flinched at the silhouette of a Tiger's long-barreled .88, now searched for Fireflies in their columns the way infantry searched for machine gun teams. When a Firefly was present, entire units moved differently, bolder, more coordinated, no longer withdrawing at the first sign of German armor. The Sherman had always been reliable. It had always been produced in vast numbers, but for the first time, Allied tankers felt it had teeth. Firefly crews became the quiet heroes of their armored troops, rarely celebrated, never flamboyant, but carrying the responsibility of transforming a formation of moderately armed tanks into a balanced, lethal force capable of taking on anything the Germans fielded. The Firefly turned Sherman platoons from prey into predators. American observers wrote that morale shifted almost overnight. The same crews who once hesitated to engage a Panther at distance now held their ground, knowing that somewhere behind them, waiting, patient, hidden, was a tank that could reach farther, hit harder, and penetrate deeper than any Allied gun that had come before. Infantrymen in France, Belgium, and Holland began referring to Fireflies as our insurance policy. When patrols spotted German armor, the first question was no longer, do we have to retreat, but where's the Firefly? On the German side, fear evolved into respect, and then into obsession. Panzer commanders wrote reports warning their units to identify Fireflies immediately on the battlefield. A torn-page diary found near Aachen contained a single line: avoid the long barrel at all costs. Tiger and Panther crews began firing smoke screens at the first muzzle flash of a 17-pounder, or retreating into cover rather than risk a long-range duel they no longer controlled. Some German tankers later admitted they felt naked in open terrain, knowing that even at 1,500 meters, a Firefly could split their armor with terrifying accuracy. The once invincible Tiger, whose myth had been built through North Africa and the Eastern Front, was finally facing something it could not simply brush aside. But perhaps the true legacy of the Firefly lay not only in its battlefield record, but in what it symbolized: the triumph of innovation over fear. In 1943, the Sherman was a workhorse. Dependable, versatile, but outgunned by its German counterparts. Soldiers joked darkly that its gasoline engine made it a Ronson, lights first time, every time. The arrival of the Firefly erased that stigma. Suddenly, the Sherman was not the underdog. It was the foundation for a tank that could challenge the enemy's best. Years after the war, veterans described their first time seeing a Tiger explode under a Firefly shot as a moment of emotional release. It was like watching a bully finally get punched in the mouth, one American tanker recalled. Others remembered the silence inside their turret after hearing over the radio that a Firefly had knocked out a Panther at 1,200 yards. Silence not of disbelief, but of relief. Relief that they no longer had to fight a battle weighted entirely against them. Relief that their lives did not depend solely on numbers, luck, or air support. Relief that armor could fight armor again. The Firefly did not win the war for Allies. Mechanical failures, fuel shortages, and dwindling German industry played their roles, but the Firefly shattered the aura of invincibility that protected the Tiger psychologically more than its armor ever did physically. It proved that Allied ingenuity could match and even surpass the engineering prestige of Germany. When the war ended and Fireflies were retired or scrapped, many crews felt a pang of sadness. They had lived inside those cramped interiors, fought through hedgerows and villages, fired shots that shaped the course of entire battles. To them, the Firefly was more than metal. It was justice delivered through steel. It was proof that no enemy machine, no matter how terrible, was beyond the reach of human invention. Today, Fireflies sit in museums, quiet and unassuming. Visitors walk past them without realizing that this awkward-looking tank, with its oversized gun and improvised modifications, carried the hopes of thousands of young men who once stared down tigers and panthers with shaking hands and racing hearts. They do not know that inside these steel walls, crews whispered prayers, shared cigarettes, and steadied themselves before taking the shot that would change the fate of a battle. The Firefly deserves more than a line in a history book. It deserves remembrance as the weapon that broke the fear, the tank that turned the tide, and the machine that proved that even the mightiest predators can be brought down by those who refuse to stop fighting. In the end, the tiger was a legend. But the Firefly was the answer. The tank that finally let the Allies look the enemy in the eye and fire back.